Welcome back. The Reform UK Councillor and Deputy Leader of Durham County Council, Darren Grimes, joins me now. Darren, lovely to see you this morning. Now, I don't know whether you caught my interview with Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, but he's accused Nigel Farage of getting into bed with Labour, suggesting that in his suggestion that he wants to end that two-child benefit cap, he's actually now become a proponent of Corbynista politics.
Look, do you know what? I will come to that, but I'm not going to take any lectures, frankly, from a Tory who's been there since the Cameron years, right? Stood by as a minister through several portfolios, when actually the Tories' idea for solving our demographic issues or family policy was to import millions through mass migration. And look how that's worked out. You know, you see in your good paper just this week, Camilla, that benefits claims by foreign nationals have doubled to a nearly £1 billion a month, £1 billion. That's their brilliant demographic strategy, from 461 million to 941 million in just 3 years. And that happened under their watch, under the Boris wave of mass migration. That was their solution. So, yeah, on the idea that we're suddenly some form of bleeding heart liberal or even socialists, I've had this put to me. Just last week, I was on another broadcaster, Camilla, and it was put to me that I'm a fascist. Now I'm a socialist. It seems people can't make up how they want to pigeonhole the Reform Party. And it's because we stand for one thing and one thing only, and that's the national interest, for common sense. The fact of the matter is here, Labour could lift 350,000 kids out of relative poverty tomorrow by scrapping the two-child benefit cap, but they won't. They'd rather keep this policy in place whilst lecturing everybody else about compassion and social justice. But if you come over here, as over 1,000 people just did yesterday, you come over here in a boat illegally, you'll get given absolutely everything for free.
Yes.
But if you have 3 children, Camilla, and you end up in a nasty divorce, and I've been there, I've known my family go through similar circumstance, and you end up being punished as a 3rd child. Do you think that's fair, right, or just? I certainly don't.
I take your point. I take your point on compassionate politics. But this is the reality of the situation. And do you know what? The British public aren't with Reform or Nigel Farage or you on this. 6 in 10 support the two-child benefit cap. Why? Because the benefit bill has gone up exponentially over the course of the last decade. It's up by £86 billion. You look at the pie chart of what happens to every pound that taxpayers earn, 31.8% goes on welfare. That's 10% more than all of the money we pay towards the NHS. It's totally unsustainable. It doesn't make political sense. I get the idea of supporting family-friendly tax policies. I get that. But the public isn't behind you. Most working class people, by the way, think the cap should be in place because they're suspicious of people having children and gaming the system.
Absolutely. But what I would say to that is, Camilla, look at the other stats for Britain's birth rate, for example, 1.4 children per woman. I mean, we're on the path here to demographic extinction. The replacement rate has to be 2.1, which means obviously that we're not producing enough children to actually maintain our population. So I would say to people in a heartfelt plea, this isn't about statistics. This isn't about being a benefit state. And I agree the benefits bill itself ought to be reformed. Of course it should. But other countries are going hell for leather on this. Hungary restructured their entire economy around families. Japan quadrupled spending on family formation. South Korea threw $200 billion at the problem. We've got to do something about this, because whilst we're sitting here in British families today, they could disappear from tomorrow. We can't accept that decline here is inevitable, because the solution from Labour and the Tories would be mass migration, Camilla, and we simply don't want that.
The thing about immigrants is they tend to have more children. If you're worried about the population of the UK, why aren't you happy about people coming to this country, settling here, getting British citizenship and having loads of children?
Because I care about my own first, ultimately, right? I care about the people here. I care about the fact that there is a massive rank hypocrisy whilst the Labour Party are spending 4 to 5 billion quid on asylum seekers, so-called asylum seekers, whilst we're arguing here about scraps like the winter fuel payment and the 2-child benefit cap, right? Which would amount to about a similar amount of cash. So the fact of the matter is we are not getting our priorities right, and we are choosing to prioritise foreigners over the British public. And I don't think that's where the British public are actually at either.
But are the British public in favour of big government spending plans like those that Reform have come out with this week? I've spoken to Andrew Lillico. He, as you know, he's a fair-minded economist. He looks very much at kind of parties on the right and looks at what they are planning to spend. And he's basically saying that we're now in an era where it doesn't matter whether you're Reform or Labour, it's all about high tax and spend. This isn't the Thatcherism that a lot of your supporters will be calling for.
No, so the policies would work hand in hand. So yes, we prioritise the British families expanding and having more kids, or even just getting started altogether. I hear so many people, I'm in County Durham, house prices are not as high as the rest of the country, but people struggle to get on the housing ladder, even up here. What chance do young families have? That's why we're not having children. So we work on a multi-policy front, which actually says, yeah, taxes are too high. They are not allowing people to actually earn enough money to have start a family. Net zero is immiserating the country. Factories are closing at a rate of knots. You've got Nissan and Sunderland talking about leaving, which would be a hammer blow for the northeast economy.
Okay.
So we work with, it is a multi-policy approach, Camilla, where yes, you have a benefit prioritisation of British families, but also you get rid of the absolute insane policy agenda, which is bankrupting Britain and its families.
All right, Darren Grimes, thank you very, very much indeed for joining me this morning. Let's talk about white working class children falling behind, because there's a whole series of education stories in all of the papers, actually. And the data isn't looking good, is it, for particularly young white boys?
Yes, for some, this is the particular, here's the headline, it says it, doesn't it? All but 21 of the UK's 3,400 secondary schools, white working class boys fall behind. In other words, their exam results are absolutely terrible or indeed non-existent. I mean, they just don't get any passes at all. White working class girls are not quite so bad, but it's nearly there. Well, the criticism is that there were actually one or two initiatives by the last government to try to tackle this sort of thing, be a bit tougher. They had sort of, I think, hubs where white working class boys were encouraged to go to sort of boost up their education. And these things are among the many things that have had to be slimmed back, because if you're going to try and spend money the way that the Education Secretary wants to in other ways, you can't do everything. But it's a terrific problem, isn't it? One of the things many things I don't understand about it, but one of them is it doesn't seem to apply in other countries. We measure up terribly badly to every other country, and I don't know why that should be.
I wonder if we can get up the Observer page 12, because it was quite an interesting chart of how white children compare to other ethnicities. And this is the other problem as well, that if you look at members of the Indian community, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, their children are all performing better, it seems, in UK schools than ours are. And then you have to ask yourself the question, and this was something that Nigel Farage raised in the week, and I'll be speaking to Darren Grimes a bit later about Reform's sort of family-friendly tax policies, if you can put it that way. Is it because of family, breakdown of family? Are white working-class families more likely to have a degree of breakdown in the marriages?
I think all these things, probably all these things. And at the end of the day, the other thing I do wonder about and worry about, because, you know, grandchildren and people coming up behind us all the time, is what are actually people going to be doing when they do actually finally leave school and education, college, maybe even university. Here's another thing, you know, it's all talking about white working class children, but even people who are getting a good education going right through the system to university, not finding the opportunities there. Right. Terrifying. So the people at the bottom of the heap are bound to be worse off.
There's actually a really good study in there. There's a campaigner called Paul Wiltshire who has done a load of work on whether degrees actually do pay the salaries that they promise the students at the beginning of the course, at the end of the course. And there are a lot of degrees out there which perhaps don't need to be studied over 3 years. It's too expensive now. They could be completed in 2. Are you going to earn more money at the end of it? Would it be better to do a degree apprenticeship and all the rest of it?